A metal barn sits on a few quiet acres of open land. From the road, it looks like 1,000 others. Corrugated steel walls, a simple gabled roof, the kind of building you would drive right past without a second thought. But step through this front door and something ancient is waiting inside. A heavy wooden frame left completely exposed, an open floor plan that seems to breathe. A deep, deliberate entry where the outside world gets left behind. This barndominium was built by an American family who had never once set foot in Japan. And yet, without knowing it, they rebuilt a design language that was perfected more than 1,000 years ago in the farmhouses of rural Japan. Those farmhouses have a name. They are called Minka. And once you understand the connection, you will never look at a plain metal barn the same way again. Before we step all the way inside, one quick thing. If you love uncovering the hidden histories buried inside ordinary buildings, the kind of stories almost everyone walks straight past, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. Every week we take you inside one remarkable home and show you the secrets built quietly into its walls. So let's find out how a barn in the middle of the American countryside ended up speaking a 1,000-year-old Japanese language it was never taught. To understand what makes this house so strange, you first have to understand how ordinary it was supposed to be. The barndominium is one of the most American building ideas of the last 50 years. The word itself is a mashup, barn and condominium fused together, and it was reportedly coined back in 1989 by a real estate developer who imagined horse barns with comfortable living quarters attached. For a long time, it stayed a niche, a practical trick used by ranchers and farmers who wanted to live close to their animals and their equipment. Then, in 2016, a home renovation show called Fixer Upper put one on national television, and suddenly the whole country wanted one. The appeal is simple. You take a large steel or wooden frame, the same kind used to build agricultural barns, and you turn the inside into a home. Wide open interiors, soaring ceilings, big windows that pour in light, exposed beams running overhead. Because the shell goes up fast and cheap, families could get far more space for their money than a conventional house would ever allow. Today, they sit on rural lots across Texas, across the Midwest, across the South, quiet symbols of a certain kind of freedom. Land, space, and a home you built your own way. There is a reason the idea caught fire the way it did. A barndominium is a resourceful person's home. It carries the spirit of the maker, the rancher, the do-it-yourself family who would rather build something honest and useful than buy something fancy and fragile. It says right out loud that a home does not need to hide its purpose in order to be worth living in. Keep that idea close because it is the same spirit that raised the Minka. And it is the quiet thread that ties this entire story together. So this should be a purely modern story, a 21st century answer to the high cost of housing. But walk inside the barndominium at the center of our story, and the modern part starts to fall away almost immediately. The first thing you notice is the frame. Overhead, running the entire length of the ceiling, are thick wooden posts and heavy beams, left bare and honest. Nothing is buried behind drywall. The bones of the building are the decoration. You can trace exactly how the weight of the roof travels down through the beams, into the posts, and down into the ground beneath your feet. Nothing pretends to be anything other than what it is. There is a strange calm to a room like this, a feeling most people cannot quite name when they first walk in. It feels solid. It feels true. Run your hand along one of those posts and you can feel the grain of the wood, the small ridges and knots that no machine can fake. Look up and the beams cross overhead in a clean, deliberate lattice, every one of them doing real work, none of them for show. This is not a decorator's idea of rustic charm bolted onto an ordinary house. This is the actual structure, wearing no disguise at all. And it is the first and clearest sign that whoever built this place, knowingly or not, was following rules far older than they were. Now hold that image in your mind because we are about to travel 8,000 miles and 1,000 years away to a mountain village in central Japan. And when we get there, you are going to see that exact same ceiling looking back at you. Long before skyscrapers, before nails were cheap, before power tools ever existed, Japanese farmers faced the same problem every builder in history has faced. How do you make shelter out of whatever the land gives you? What the land gave them was wood. Japan is a country of forests and steep mountains, and its people became some of the finest woodworkers who have ever lived. Out of that wood, over many centuries, they developed the Minka, a word that simply means house of the people. These were not the homes of emperors or samurai lords. They were the homes of farmers, fishermen, merchants, and craftsmen. Ordinary people building extraordinary things out of trees and clay and straw. And the Minka was never one single design. It was a whole living family of them, shaped by the land and the climate of each region of Japan. In the snowbound mountains, you found the steep, towering farmhouses we will come back to shortly. In the crowded cities, you found the machiya, narrow wooden townhouses pressed shoulder to shoulder, with a shop at the front and family rooms stretching back behind it. Along the coasts and out across the rice plains, other forms again, each one tuned to its own weather and its own work. What united them was never a single look. It was a shared logic, a shared honesty about wood and weather and daily labor. And that shared logic is exactly what turns up, uninvited, inside a steel barn in rural America. A Minka was built around a skeleton of wooden posts and beams raised first as a frame before a single wall went up. Sound familiar? The walls were never what held the building up. The frame did that. The walls were only skin, thin panels of wood, packed clay, paper, and woven straw, hung between the posts and easily removed or replaced. The whole structure stood on its bones, exactly like the barn we just walked into. And here is the detail that separates a fine Minka from almost anything ever built in the West. In the best examples, that entire wooden skeleton was joined together without a single nail. Japanese carpenters cut precise interlocking joints directly into the timber, notches and tongues and pegs that locked the frame together through friction and gravity alone. A master builder could assemble a house like a giant three-dimensional puzzle. And if a beam ever failed, it could be carved out and replaced without tearing the whole structure down. Some Minka built this way are still standing after 3, 4, even 500 years of rain, snow, and time. There is something else that joinery gave them, something the builders may not have fully understood at the time. A frame held together by flexible wooden joints can move. When the ground shakes, and in Japan it shakes often, a rigid building cracks and shatters, but a jointed timber frame can flex and sway and settle back into place. The Minka was quietly engineered to survive the one force that levels most buildings. It bent so that it would not break. And nearly all of it was done by hand and by eye. There were no computers checking the loads, no factories stamping out identical parts. A Minka carpenter carried the entire structure inside his head, learned across a long and demanding apprenticeship, passed down from master to student like a spoken language. Every joint was cut to fit one specific place in one specific house and nowhere else. That knowledge grew so refined and so hard-won that when it began to fade in the modern era, people slowly realized they were losing something that could never simply be printed in a book and handed back. It lived in the hands. But the frame is only where the similarities begin. Because the very way you enter a Minka, the moment you cross its threshold, is hiding inside that American barn too. In a traditional Minka, you did not walk straight from the mud of the farm into the living space. You stepped first into a zone called the doma, an entry area with a hard-packed earthen floor, sitting right at ground level. This was the working heart of the house. It was where you left your muddy sandals, where tools were stored, where the cooking fire often burned, where farmers processed their harvest, and where, in the harshest regions, animals were sheltered through brutal winters. Beyond the doma, raised up a step onto a wooden platform, began the clean living space, the world of rest and family and sleep. That raised step had a name and a purpose. It was the genkan, the boundary between outside and inside, between labor and rest, between the world of dirt and the world of comfort. You physically stepped up out of one life and into another. Even now, in modern Japanese homes, that small ritual survives. You lower yourself at the genkan, you remove your shoes, and you rise into the clean part of the home. 1,000 years of habit compressed into a single step. Now think about how a working barndominium is actually lived in. You come in from the land, from the workshop, from the muddy truck, and you step into a large utility zone. Call it a mudroom, call it a shop bay, a hard-floored space where boots come off and gear gets dropped before you move up and into the finished living quarters. Rural American families built that transition space for exactly the same reason Japanese farmers did 1,000 years earlier. When your home is tied to the land and to labor, you need somewhere to shed the outside world before you carry it inside. Nobody ever handed those American builders a diagram of a doma. They arrived at it because the problem demanded it. And that, it turns out, is a pattern we are going to see again and again in this story. Look up next, at the roof, and the connection gets even harder to explain away. High in the mountains of central Japan sits a village called Shirakawa-go. In 1995, it was named a World Heritage Site, and the reason is its houses. They are a style of Minka called Gasho Zukuri, which translates roughly to constructed like hands in prayer. The name comes from the roofs, which are enormous, steep, and triangular, angled sharply like two palms pressed together and pointed up at the sky. That steepness was never for looks. This region gets buried under some of the heaviest snowfall on Earth, and a shallow roof would collapse under the weight by midwinter. So the builders pitched their roofs at a severe angle, letting the snow slide off before it could pile up and crush the house. Beneath that thick thatch, the vast triangular attic became usable workspace, often for raising silkworms in the cold months. Every part of the shape did a job. Nothing about it was ornament. Now picture the classic barn roof, steep, gabled, often with a tall, usable loft tucked up beneath it. American barns were pitched sharply for the very same reasons, to throw off rain and snow and to open up dry storage overhead. The Barndominium inherits that roofline directly. Two building traditions on opposite sides of the planet looked up at the same falling snow and drew the same triangle. And they did not stop at the shape. Both traditions pushed their roofs outward, extending the eaves far past the walls in deep, generous overhangs. In the Minka, those deep eaves shaded the interior from the harsh summer sun, while still letting the low winter light slip in underneath. They also protected the fragile mud and paper walls from being battered by rain. On a barn and on a barndominium, those same wide overhangs shelter the walls and shade the big windows from the worst of the afternoon heat. Function first, beauty as the byproduct, the materials could hardly be more different. The Minka wore a thick coat of thatch, bundles of dried grass and reed layered a full arm's length deep, so dense that rain simply ran off the surface and never soaked through to the frame below. Every few decades, the whole village would gather to strip an old roof bare and rethatch it together, a shared act of labor that bound the community as tightly as it sealed the house. The barndominium wears a skin of corrugated steel, bolted down in an afternoon and good for decades with almost no attention at all. One roof is grass and one roof is metal. But both were chosen for the very same reason, because each was the most effective, most available way to keep the weather where it belonged, outside. The logic underneath never changed, only the material on top. But maybe the deepest connection between these two houses is not something you can see at all. It is something you feel the instant you walk in. The way the building handles air and light and heat. A Minka was, in a sense, a machine for living with the seasons, powered by nothing but its own shape. The floors of the living space were raised up off the ground on posts, so that air could flow underneath and keep the wood dry and the rooms cool. In summer, the walls practically disappeared. Those light sliding panels could be slid open or lifted out entirely, turning solid rooms into open pavilions and pulling cross breezes straight through the middle of the house. A famous Japanese essayist once wrote that a house should be built with summer in mind, because a home you can survive in the heat, you can always warm again in the cold. Wrapping around many Minka was a narrow wooden veranda called the Engawa. It ran along the outer edge of the house, tucked under those deep eaves, a thin strip of polished floor that was neither fully inside nor fully outside. The Engawa was a buffer, a soft border that let the house breathe with the garden beyond it, and gave the family a shaded place to sit at the seam between the two worlds. It is one of the most beloved features in all of Japanese architecture, a place to drink tea, watch the rain, and belong to both the house and the land at once. Walk that American barndominium and you feel the ghost of every one of these ideas. The wide covered porches that wrap the exterior are engawa in all but name, shaded transition zones between the house and the acreage. The tall interior volume lets hot air rise up and escape overhead. The big operable windows and doors pull cross-ventilation straight through the open plan, the very same trick the Minka played with its sliding walls. The materials are completely different. Steel and modern insulation instead of clay and straw. But the strategy to work with the climate instead of fighting it is exactly the same. And then there is the fire. At the center of the oldest Minka sat something called the irori, a sunken hearth cut right into the floor. It was the true heart of the home. The family gathered around it to cook, to eat, to dry their clothes, and to stay warm through the long nights. The smoke had nowhere obvious to go, so it drifted up through the whole house and out through gaps in the roof, and over the years it slowly blackened the great beams above. That drifting smoke was not just waste. It cured the timber and the thatch, it drove out insects, and it made the entire frame last longer. Step into that barndominium and there it is again, in modern form. A wood stove or a great central fireplace anchoring the open room. The family drawn toward the warmth in the evenings, the same gravity that pulled Japanese families around the Aurora 1,000 years ago. We have traded the sunken pit for a steel stove and a proper chimney, but the instinct is unchanged. A home wants a hearth. A home wants a heart. There is one more thread running underneath all of this, quieter than the rest but perhaps the strongest of them all. Money, or rather the lack of it. The Minka was the home of people who could not afford to waste a single thing. Every timber was used fully, every material came from close by, drawn from the forests and fields within a short walk of the house. Nothing was shipped in from far away because for most families nothing could be. The barndominium was born from that very same frugal instinct. Families chose the barn shell precisely because it was cheap, fast, and efficient, because it stretched a limited budget further than any conventional house ever could. Both homes are, at their core, the honest architecture of practical people who had to be clever with what they had in front of them. And it turns out that being clever with what you have, patiently, generation after generation, is one of the surest paths there is to timeless design. Now look at the space itself, the room. Or rather, look at the way both of these buildings refuse to lock themselves into rooms at all. Step inside almost any Minka and you will not find a maze of small fixed rooms sealed off by permanent walls. You will find one large, flexible volume, divided only by screens that move. Some of those dividers were paper-covered and translucent, letting a soft, glowing light pass through while still blocking sight. Others were solid and opaque, sliding on wooden tracks. But crucially, none of them held up the building, so all of them could move. Slide them shut and you had private rooms for sleeping. Slide them open, and the entire floor became one great hall for a gathering, a funeral, or a celebration. A single room could be a bedroom at night, a dining space at midday, and a workroom in the afternoon. The house bent itself around the life being lived inside it, hour by hour. That translucent paper did one more thing that steel and glass still struggle to match. It softened the light. Sun never crashed directly into a Minka. It was filtered through paper spread evenly across the room, turned into a gentle glow that made even a humble farmhouse feel serene. The play of soft light and deep shadow inside these homes became its own quiet art form admired and written about for centuries. Even the measurements were flexible in a standardized way. Minka interiors were often laid out around the tatami mat, a woven floor mat of a roughly consistent size. Rooms were described not in feet or in meters, but in the number of mats they could hold. A 4.5 mat room, a 6 mat room, an 8 mat room. The whole house was a grid of repeatable, human-sized modules. It was, in a very real sense, modular construction, invented and perfected centuries before we ever coined the phrase. Now look back at the barndominium. Its single greatest selling point, the thing every owner brags about first, is the wide-open floor plan. One enormous interior volume framed by that exposed skeleton that the family can carve up however they please. Move a partition, and the layout changes overnight. The kitchen flows into the living area, which flows into the workspace, one continuous space that adapts to whoever lives there and however they live. The barndominium sells itself as the future of flexible living. The Minka was quietly doing exactly that 1,000 years in the past. People who move into a home like this often describe the very same thing, a sense of openness they did not expect, a feeling, hard to put into words, that the house is somehow on their side. They rarely have the language for why. But part of the answer is that they are standing inside a design that human beings have been refining and being quietly soothed by for a very long time. The proportions feel right because, in a real sense, they have already been tested on 1,000 years of families, and only the choices that worked were allowed to survive. By now, you might be asking the obvious question. If these two building styles share this much, is one of them simply copying the other? And the answer is where this whole story gets genuinely fascinating. The American families building barndominiums were not studying Japanese architecture in secret. They had never heard the word Minka. They were not trying to honor a 1,000-year-old tradition from across the ocean. They were trying to build an affordable, practical home out of a farm building on a tight budget. So how on earth did they land on the very same answers? The truth is that neither one copied the other. They converged. In nature, biologists have a name for this. When two completely unrelated animals evolve the same feature because they face the same problem, they call it convergent evolution. Sharks and dolphins are not close relatives at all. One is a fish, the other is a mammal, separated by hundreds of millions of years. Yet both developed the same sleek, finned, torpedo-shaped body because the ocean demanded it of both of them. The water itself wrote the design. Buildings work the same way. Give two very different cultures the same set of hard constraints, and they will tend to arrive at strikingly similar solutions. Japanese farmers and American ranchers were separated by an ocean, a language, and 1,000 years of history. But they shared the constraints that actually shape a building. They were agricultural people, living and working directly on the land. They needed to raise large, useful shelters using cheap, local materials and honest structure. They had to survive real weather, heavy snow, hard rain, blazing summers, and bitter winters. And they valued function far above ornament because, to them, a home that fails is not a philosophy problem, it is a survival problem. Same problem, same pressures, same answer. A frame of posts and beams, a skin that carries no load. A steep roof with deep, sheltering eaves. A hard-floored threshold between work and rest. A hearth at the center. An open, adaptable interior. Deep porches to soften the edge between inside and out. The Minka and the Barndominium are not relatives on a family tree. They are two separate solutions to the same equation, worked out independently, 1,000 years apart. Historians and architects see this pattern all over the world once they start looking for it. The dome, the arch, the courtyard, the steep pitched roof, all of them appear again and again in cultures that had no contact with one another whatsoever, simply because they are good answers to universal problems. The Minka and the Barndominium are one more entry in that long, quiet catalog of ideas that humanity keeps rediscovering on its own. Two peoples, an ocean and a millennium apart, both handed the same puzzle by the land beneath them, and both, in the end, solving it in almost exactly the same way. Which leaves us with one last question, and it is the most important one of all. If a barn built last year and a farmhouse built 1,000 years ago are somehow speaking the same language, what can the older, wiser voice teach the younger one? Here is the humbling part. The Minka has already answered questions the Barndominium has not even thought to ask yet. Start with time. A well-built Minka was designed to last for generations and to be repaired forever. Because it was joined together rather than glued and nailed and sealed, any single piece could be replaced without destroying the whole. A rotted post could be cut out and a fresh one slotted in. The house was never meant to be thrown away. It was meant to be maintained, handed down, and quietly renewed, one timber at a time, across centuries of family life. Many modern homes, by painful contrast, are built to last only a few decades before they are demolished and hauled off to a landfill. The Minka asks a pointed and slightly uncomfortable question. What if we built homes our great-grandchildren could still be living in? Then there is the philosophy hiding in the wood itself. Japanese culture holds an aesthetic idea called Wabi-sabi, a deep appreciation for the beauty of natural materials, of age, of imperfection, and of the marks that time leaves behind. In a Minka, the exposed wooden frame was never something to hide. It was the honest, beautiful truth of the building, darkening and gaining character with every passing decade. The smoke from the hearth would slowly blacken the great beams overhead, and this was not seen as damage. It was seen as the house earning its history, growing more beautiful as it grew older. And this, more than anything else, is what that American Barndominium stumbled into without ever realizing it. When those builders left the wooden frame exposed instead of covering it up, when they let the steel and the timber and the raw, honest structure simply show, they were making a wabi-sabi choice. They were quietly insisting that the bones of a building are the beautiful part. They were letting the house be exactly what it is, and asking it to lie about nothing. 1,000 years apart, two cultures arrived at the very same quiet truth. There is a deep and lasting beauty in a building that tells you the truth about what holds it up. That is the quiet secret inside this plain metal barn, and inside 1,000 years of Japanese farmhouses. Not a style, a way of thinking. So let's go back one last time to where we started. That plain metal barn sitting on its few quiet acres, the one you would drive right past without a second glance. It is not plain at all. Inside its walls lives a design language older than most of the nations on Earth, refined by 1,000 years of farmers who learned, generation after patient generation, how to build shelter that works with the world instead of against it. The exposed frame that carries the load. The threshold at the door where the outside world is left behind. The steep roof and its deep, sheltering eaves. The porch that softens the edge of the land. The hearth pulling the family inward. The open room that becomes whatever the day requires. Every single one of those choices was made twice on opposite sides of the earth for the exact same human reasons. The family who raised this home never set out to honor Japan, and that might be the most beautiful part of all. Good design is not owned by any one country or any one century or any one culture. It is discovered again and again by anyone humble enough to solve a real problem honestly. The Minka and the Barndominium together are living proof that when human beings build close to the land, listen to the weather, and refuse to hide the truth of a structure, they end up, almost inevitably, building the same house. 1,000 years apart, 8,000 miles away, and still the same set of hands pressed together, pointed up at the sky.